Hi there. One of the things I try to do in these videos is bring up ideas or thoughts that I haven't heard necessarily discussed elsewhere. So just because I don't bring it up doesn't mean I don't think it's important. So I could talk more about the impeachment and all that, but at this point I don't think I have anything to add other than it's meaningless. One of the things I hear from people a lot, I don't know if I hear it a lot, but people will say, oh, I really like this person and they should run for president. But I don't think that's enough, okay? There's so many skill sets you need to be a good president. Just because a person is charismatic, just because a person is persuasive, that's not enough. You might say it's the sine qua non of being a good president, a good leader. You need those qualities, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be enough to be an effective president. That's why I'm so fascinated by our President Trump, because as I've mentioned in earlier videos, I've studied a lot of presidents in the past, and his skill set, his abilities are so amazing to me. He's just fun to watch. And I'm just delighted that he's our president. But I mean, let me just mention a few things, because I hear people say, oh, Kanye West or this or that. You need to know how to pick and lead an effective executive team. And look at what President Trump has done. There's always chaos in the beginning. Someone once said, starting a president, I mean, it's like building a company. All of a sudden you have a big company and you have to get the executives on board. You've got to do a lot of things. And if it's an arena that you're not familiar with, that's going to be difficult. So say someone who has never served in government or led a large organization, they're going to have a hard time. So we've had people like President Eisenhower. Well, he was a top general. He was head of the European Theater of Operations, so during World War II. So he was used to leading large organizations. So he already had a skill set, and the skill set of President Trump is just amazing. So when people talk about Kanye West, when they talk about, I don't know, I've had people say Tulsi Gabbard or even people who think Andrew Yang. I mean, not that many people think, but you know what I'm saying. In other words, it's not enough that you think, oh, I like what they have to say. They'll be a good president. No, that's not enough. That's not enough. It's a whole set of skills. And of course, it's nice if they're persuasive and they're charismatic, but can they get their policies put forward? And it's not just their policy positions, because their policy positions will change once they're on the job. They have to, because it's hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so having said that, let me mention something about that I thought about. I didn't watch the Democratic debate, but I saw excerpts from it, and there was a lot, as many of you saw, about between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And there's talk that because they have similar policies, people act like their followers, if one drops out of the race, their followers will go to the other. I don't think that's true. Now, in fairness, other people have said this. After I had this thought, I heard a few people mention it. But I don't think their followers are fungible, meaning interchangeable, especially the so-called Bernie bros. I mean, I actually think that a lot of what is appealing about Bernie Sanders, I mean, it's not appealing to me, but you got to say he's honest and authentic. And that comes across. And he's a fighter. Elizabeth Warren appeals, I find it hard to think that she's appealing, but she appeals to a different group of people. And a lot of times when people choose who they want to support for president, I don't think it's just about the policies. I mean, it's a little bit about the policies, but it's more about who do you want as your leader of the country. And I just don't see those Bernie bros going for Elizabeth Warren. The bigger topic I want to talk about today, because this comes up a lot, and I've heard people mention this, like, well, didn't you see the Pentagon? And now this is all about the climate alarmism issue. Didn't you see the Pentagon study? Didn't you see what this economist wrote? You have to realize, you don't have to realize, it's not the right way to say it. What is going on here is they already accept the premise that climate is going to do whatever the so-called experts say it's going to do. And then they write about that. So if you've got some colonel or group at the Pentagon, they're not independently looking at the likelihood of this. They're just saying, okay, the science says this is going to happen. Of course, the science doesn't really say that, but they think the science says that. So they'll write a report based on, okay, how would we operate in the future if there were whatever, increased droughts, whatever they think is going on. That's true for economists as well. Okay, if you have this. So if an economist and someone in Wall Street, venture capitalist, insurance companies, if any of those say something about the climate issue, it's not because they've evaluated it themselves. They already accept the premise. So it's meaningless to me as a way to evaluate the validity of climate change. It just shows how much the tentacles of this have spread. Although at the same time, I'm very pleased that there's more and more people that are kind of waking up to this, but certainly not in official circles yet. But they will. But I just laugh. I mean, if you hear it from anybody that is not, it's even hard to find experts in it. The best people are retired people and people who have looked at it. And let me mention something about, I'm going to jump ahead in my list, that you really cannot, I'm saying you really cannot, that's not the right way to put it, because you can do whatever you want. But you can't evaluate this without looking at history. Not only the history of the Earth's climate and how it varies a lot in so many, I would love for all these so-called climate scientists, instead of working with their models, to actually study this. And I've mentioned this before, because we have all kinds of cyclical things that are happening. You know, there's a Pacific decadal oscillation. I think it's like 30 years. You have some kind of oscillation in the Atlantic. You have sunspot cycles. There's just a whole host of things that affect climate and give us these warm periods and cool periods, and we don't know much about it. So we've really set the whole climate study area, it'll take a long time to recover. So when people say, and you know, I've heard, I like Scott Adams a lot, but not in this area. I've heard him mention something like, you know, how can you evaluate the science? It's like, if you're just stuck in the present and you have no conception of the past and what's happened in the past, it's very hard to evaluate. You're going to see this one study, but if you don't understand how the funding for that study came about, how the pressures are on anybody currently trying to get money in this field, funding for their studies, it's like impossible. And you're kind of ostracized because you hurt the funding for everybody else. You know, I go at Caltech a lot, and I looked around at the people there, and I know privately I've had some discussions with them regarding, they're individually skeptical of the whole climate alarmism thing, but they will not want to talk about it. You know, once I have a discussion with them, if I try to broach it again, it's like they just don't want to go there. And I think, well, you know, they have to be around these people all the time. You're kind of it's sort of like if you were a Trump supporter with a bunch of people with Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, you can't just come out and say something or you'll be ostracized. And they've got to live and work in this community. So I find the people who are retired to be in a much better situation. Now, someone like John Christie and Roy Spencer, they're at the University of Alabama at Huntsville, and their funding does not depend on this. So they can be more honest. But most of the people, like Richard Lindzen and others, they're emeritus, they're retired, and you know what they say. I mean, they're so much more knowledgeable than the people now who are fiddling with models. But however, as I've mentioned before, everybody I've come across, they all know the models are bad. That's just a given. You don't have any problem saying those climate models overshoot. But the current thinking among those who think that CO2 is some kind of control knob, which is nuts to think that. To be honest, let's just call a spade. That is nuts to think that. Okay. So when I mentioned this thing about how economists, the Pentagon, all these different organizations, they're relying on the science, quote, science they find somewhere else that's been published. And they take that as the starting point and then come up with their studies. I first came across this phenomenon when my parents passed away in 2010. It wasn't a surprise when my dad passed away because he'd been kind of failing, but he was 90. My mother was 85, almost 86, but very fit. I mean, for 86, you know, I thought she'd live to 100 maybe. But within 6 days, she died. That's a whole nother story. It's just amazing, the power of your mind. She did not want to live without my dad. But one of the things we found, because I was there, she lived in Portland, Oregon, a lot of us were there, but when we called the ambulance, when the medics, you know, the EMTs or whatever came by, they said, "Is your mother diabetic?" Because she was very slender. And we didn't know she was diabetic, and we said, "No." And they said, "Well, her blood sugar is," like, pegged the meter over 500, and then when they got to the hospital, it was 800. So they put her on insulin and all that. So I knew that on my mother's side of the family, there was a problem with blood sugar. And it's a blood sugar problem that it's like we don't have enough beta cells in our pancreas as we get older. So I got a blood sugar meter, and sure enough, I was what we would call pre-diabetic. And I started checking everything I ate. And let me tell you, the recommendations for what diabetics should eat are so bad. They're not true. Like, eat complex carbohydrates. I mean, I had things like Ezekiel bread, because I was really healthy, you know, fruit, Ezekiel bread, soy burgers. If I ate that stuff, my blood sugar would shoot up. But if I ate, you know, meat, fish, some vegetables, I'd stay low. And I read up on why would the Diabetic Association recommend these kinds of foods? This is terrible. But it turns out that the Diabetic Association, because they know that most diabetics die of heart disease, they thought the most important thing is protect your heart. So they went over to the AMA, the American Medical Association, I guess that's what it's called. But anyway, the one for the heart. And they looked at that and they said, what were those recommendations for good heart health? They thought that was the most important. So I did it myself. I just checked my foods. So I don't care. I mean, I don't go by what the recommendations. And if you want to keep your blood sugar down, you got to do that. And just do it. And after a while, you know what you can eat and what you can't. Or what you can, but you shouldn't. So I was thinking, How did that happen? Why wouldn't the Diabetic Association start from ground zero and figure out what people should eat who are diabetic? They don't do that. They take as a given the American Heart Association. Yeah, it's AHA, American Heart Association. Sorry about that. I said AMA. But if you look at the American Heart Association, that stuff isn't necessarily good for your heart health either. So it's just, you know, if you just turn your health over to these medical authorities, you're not gonna be in a good way. That's my belief. You really have got to, if you have a disease or you have something, you've got to do your own research. You've got to look into it yourself, because you're going to get some really bad information. Let me just say one quick thing. Occasionally I get somebody, probably somebody who views these videos, wanting to be a friend on Facebook. I don't use Facebook. And I feel really bad. I want to like say, yes, I'll have you as a friend. I actually tried to get off Facebook. This was, I think, in 2011. I couldn't do it. I mean, it turns out they kept it. And then, I don't know, 5 years later, 6 years, 7 years later, it pops up again. And I'm like, how did that happen? I thought I deleted it. So I went back, and it was like stunning to see everything was still up. And this is back when I was a Democrat. So I didn't even like that stuff being up. So I just went through and deleted individually everything. It took a long time. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to just keep this up. And so I had like 7 friends, like very close relatives. And I never go on the site, never. So please know that I'm not wanting to be your friend. It's just I don't like Facebook. I just don't like it. Too many birthday greetings for one. And it's hard for me, from my era, to get a birthday greeting and not, I just, you know, at first it was fun, you know, you see old boyfriends from high school and it's like, oh, look. But after that, no. Okay, another thing I want to talk about is a Henry Kissinger quote that I read a long time ago. And unfortunately, I don't know where I read it. Probably in the biography of Kissinger that I read, but I don't want to look it up because he was big in the news in the 70s. But he did say something. He said, when you go to Washington to work, you are living off the intellectual capital that you built before you got to Washington. And what he meant by that is he had studied, you know, international relations and all the different things. But once you were in the thick of it, you are using your, you know, of course you're learning new things, but it's all current event things. You don't have the history and the grounding that you had before. And I've thought about that a lot when I look at my videos and then I look at someone like Scott Adams. Now, there's a lot I admire about Scott Adams, let me say that. And even doing daily videos, I admire that he can do that. And he's on Twitter, he's doing that. But let me tell you what one of the downsides I see of that is that there's no time to really research and learn new things and new ideas, which I'm doing all the time. Right now, I'm really thinking a lot about Michael Crichton. Philip Roulard has recommended the book Travels, and I'm on my 2nd reading of it, but there's something about the way Michael Crichton's mind works, and I'm not ready to articulate it now, but I love it. I love it because it's a way to bring the right brain and the left brain together in a way that just appeals to me. So that's kind of my book of the year, if you will, because usually I have like one book, and maybe someday I'll do a video on my books that affected me this way, that really changes your thinking or adds to your thinking. And if you are doing videos or you're just looking at the daily news, there's no time to come up with something deeper or to absorb it. So current news is not enough. You don't, I think it's hard to evaluate things if you don't even know a lot of the history of the areas that you're working in. And let me take, like Scott Adams, he talks a lot about Gen 4, and I think that's a great idea, okay? I'm all for it. But he's excited that it's getting more and more people are learning about it, that we should go to nuclear power in Gen 4. But as far as I know, he hasn't mentioned the history of that. I mean, one of the first things that got me interested, because I very much was, I was concerned about global warming. So I thought, well, maybe I'll form a group, and I talked to some people called Environmentalists for Nuclear Power, because I thought we should go to nuclear power. Then if you had everything nuclear power, you had electric cars. Basically, at least for transportation purposes and powering, homes, a lot of it, you wouldn't be using fossil fuels. Of course, fossil fuels are used for so many different things, even to build the cars, if you will. But then Fukushima happened. Technically, it's Fukushima Daiichi. And that was March 11th, 2011. And what was interesting about that is nobody died. As far as disasters go, the containment structure worked as it's supposed to. It wasn't what's called fail-safe like Gen 4 would be, Generation 4. But I was learning about Gen 4. Harold and I took 2 trips. Harold's my late husband, for those that don't know, to General Atomics. We met some people there, and they were building these small modular nuclear reactors. I mean, they were so cool. They were so cool. Because basically, it would kind of be in the ground, and it would just be like a little, I don't know. But it would provide a lot of power. I don't remember exactly how much. I could look at my notes, but I didn't do that. So we visited them in late 2008 and also in 2009. And they talked a lot about it being fail-safe. And what fail-safe means is if somehow it lost power, it basically just shuts down. And that's called fail-safe. So I recall that many people were talking more and more about nuclear power because the whole ClimateGate thing really hadn't taken hold yet. It was just starting to happen. And pretty much in the early stages, let's say 2008, pretty much most people, except the smart ones like Patrick Moore and others, pretty much everybody thought global warming was a thing, at least as far as I knew. And people were talking a lot. There were even programs. CNN did a program about the benefits of nuclear power. But that all went away after the Fukushima Daiichi plant. They had more problems, illnesses, sickness, from the evacuation. They didn't need to evacuate all those people. There wasn't that much radiation. I mean, I have a chart about radiation risk. The radiation was not a problem. I mean, the real radiation risk is, oh my God, don't get a CRT scan unless you have to. Those are large doses of radiation. And why people don't talk about that is amazing to me, or horrifying to me, actually. And if somebody's going to operate on my brain, then okay, I'll get a CRT scan because I want them to know where to go. You don't want people poking around in your brain. But I was watching this, I'm kind of getting a little far afield here, but I was watching this one program that was like, emergency, I think it was in Great Britain, but emergency crews saving people. And in the 5 little episodes I saw, I'm thinking, they should never have gone to the hospital for that. Seriously. Because at the end they go, just to be sure, let's give you a CT scan. And I'm like, oh my God, they're just subjecting these people to radiation. Huge, huge levels of radiation. So people have no idea what are proper radiation levels. The small amounts that you would get from from Fukushima are infinitesimal. I mean, it doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you. And I spent a lot of time, I'm not going to get into all the numbers here, but Harold and I both spent a lot of time looking at these amounts and what amounts are dangerous and what aren't. And other people did too. There were shows where people went around, and they showed that people didn't get more cancers, where radiation levels are naturally higher. So I guess what Scott Adams and others are doing now is people are kind of forgetting about Fukushima. So the fear of nuclear radiation or a nuclear accident is going away. But they had these small modular fail-safe ones before this. So if you don't know the history, you think, oh, it's happening now. But so yes, I like nuclear power, but I would not go out and I don't think let's let it fight itself out in the marketplace. I just don't like these top-down, let's change our electrical grid, let's do this. I am so turned off to that idea. That's all I want to talk about today. I do appreciate all of you listening. For some reason today was harder for me to do this video, but I'm really touched. Some people say that they look forward to it, and I don't want to not do it. So thanks for listening. Bye.